the smug, officious voice of Officer Tom O'Malley, a white man in his 50s with a prominent beer belly and eyes that always glinted with self-satisfaction, cut sharply through the noisy, crowded arrivals hall of Dulles International Airport. Late one evening, as passengers from the day's final flights wearily waited for their luggage. "Hey, ma'am, hold it right there. We need to take a closer look at your luggage. Seems to be a little problem." Ms. Susan Rice, a black woman in her 60s, dressed in a finely tailored black business suit that exuded quiet elegance and authority, had just identified and pulled her small navy blue suitcase from the slowly moving baggage carousel. Surprised, but showing no sign of confusion, she turned to face the two airport police officers who had spoken. She had just endured a nearly 6-hour flight from California, where she had attended and delivered a keynote speech at a national summit on health and education policy. The fatigue from the journey and intense meetings was still visible on her face, yet her eyes held a sharp intelligence, wisdom, and astonishing composure. The two airport police officers, O'Malley and his younger partner, Officer Mike Rossi, around 35, and also white, with a somewhat shifty and greedy look, quickly approached Ms. Rice. O'Malley's gaze was intensely scrutinizing offensively, appraising everything from her expensive-looking attire to the Coach leather handbag on her shoulder and the Cartier watch on her wrist. "Looks like you're carrying quite a few interesting and valuable things in that little suitcase, eh?" O'Malley said, a knowing, calculating smirk playing on his lips before he winked meaningfully and signaled Rossi, who stood beside him. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." "Officers," Ms. Rice replied, her voice remaining calm and firm, though a sense of unease. A familiar feeling of prejudice-based harassment began to creep in. "My luggage is perfectly normal, containing only some important work-related documents and a few personal items necessary for this short business trip." "Oh, we're the ones who decide if your luggage is normal or not, ma'am." Officer Rossi interjected, his tone no less condescending and challenging than O'Malley's. He let out a self-satisfied sneer. Then, without further explanation, without a shred of hesitation or respect, O'Malley gave a nod, and Rossi, like a trained hound, quickly stepped forward from behind, grabbed Ms. Rice's wrist, twisted it behind her back, and tightly cuffed her with a pair of cold, gleaming figure-8 handcuffs. "You're being detained for investigation on suspicion of transporting and possessing contraband. By law, you have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Arrested without cause, treated like a dangerous criminal in the middle of a crowded airport terminal." Did these two corrupt and degenerate officers have any idea that the woman they had just brazenly entrapped, whom they had so roughly handcuffed, was none other than one of the most powerful and influential figures shaping the domestic policies of the United States federal government? And could they possibly imagine that a single brief phone call coming very soon would completely alter their fates, turning them from smug hunters into pitiable prey, facing the severe punishment of the law? The woman in handcuffs was none other than Ambassador Susan Rice, a name anyone familiar with American politics would recognize. She currently held the position of Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council, an extremely important and immensely influential role within the President's administration. In this capacity, she was responsible for directly advising the President, coordinating the activities of relevant government departments, and overseeing the development and implementation of all major national policies concerning a wide range of domestic issues, from public health K-12 and higher education and sustainable economic development to social welfare programs, criminal justice reform, and civil rights protection. Ambassador Susan Rice was not only a brilliant policymaker, but also a veteran diplomat with decades of experience in some of the highest and most sensitive positions in the U.S. government. Before her current role on the Domestic Policy Council, She had served as National Security Advisor to the President, a position demanding profound understanding of global geopolitical issues and the ability to make swift, accurate decisions in crisis situations. She had also been the United States Ambassador to the United Nations, where she had excelled as a multilateral diplomat, protecting national interests and promoting democratic values and human rights on the international stage. Ambassador Rice was renowned in political circles and among the public for her sharp intellect, her ability to analyze complex issues with depth and logic, her decisiveness, and a highly professional, efficient, and notably discreet, unostentatious work style. She generally avoided unnecessary media attention regarding her private life and non-official activities, believing that work and tangible contributions were what mattered most. When traveling for non-ceremonial duties or when not requiring the highest level of security stipulated for key personnel, Ambassador Rice often chose to fly commercial like millions of other Americans. She would usually be accompanied by only one or two of her closest aides, who also bore no outward signs of being White House staff. She and her aides used standard airport security procedures like any other passenger. This practice allowed her to maintain necessary personal privacy, avoid causing undue disruption to normal airport operations, and also provided her with opportunities to connect more closely with the everyday lives of citizens, listening more directly to their concerns and aspirations. On that fateful evening, she had just returned to Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., after attending and delivering an important policy-defining speech at a major summit on healthcare reform and national education quality improvement held in California over the past 3 days. She carried only a small, compact rolling suitcase, primarily containing work-related documents and reports she needed to review on the flight, along with a few essential personal items for a multi-day business trip. She was not carrying any items of significant monetary value, nor anything that could be considered contraband or suspicious. Meanwhile, in some obscure corner of Dulles Airport, Officer Tom O'Malley was known to his colleagues and frequent travelers by the affectionate nickname, the Cunning Old Fox, a systematically corrupt officer full of schemes within the airport police force. He had worked there for over 20 years and knew every nook and cranny, every loophole in the security system, as well as the psychology of various types of passengers. O'Malley specialized in abusing his position and authority to harass, obstruct, and subtly entrap, then brazenly extort money from passengers. He deemed easy prey, often foreign tourists, new to America, elderly people traveling alone, women who appeared vulnerable, and especially people of color, whom he, with his deeply ingrained racial prejudices, always assumed were problematic, prone to crime, or had money, but wouldn't dare make a fuss if bullied. Officer Mike Rossi, about 15 years O'Malley's junior, was considered O'Malley's protege, his effective right-hand man, in most of their dirty business dealings at the airport. Rossi, despite his relative youth and inexperience, possessed an overabundance of competitiveness, recklessness, and an insatiable greed. He had quickly learned all the tricks, deceptions, and entrapment schemes from his mentor O'Malley, becoming an incredibly active and effective accomplice. At times, Rossi even proved to be more creative and ruthless than his teacher in devising new methods and reasons to fleece innocent passengers. O'Malley and Rossi frequently coordinated with seamless precision. O'Malley, with his experience and cunning, would spot the prey, devise the plan, and direct from a distance. Rossi, with his youth and recklessness, would directly execute the actions, like approaching, searching, handcuffing, applying psychological pressure, and making threats. When Officer O'Malley saw Ms. Susan Rice, a black woman seemingly older but still agile, very elegantly and expensively dressed, and traveling alone, making her easier to isolate and target, who had just deplaned from a long flight, likely tired and unwilling to face further trouble, He immediately smelled money, viewing her as a target too juicy to pass up for an evening's side hustle. He winked at Rossi, and the two degenerate officers quickly approached Ms. Rice just as she identified and pulled her small navy blue suitcase from the slowly moving baggage carousel. O'Malley began his charade with probing, deliberately obstructive questions about the contents of Ms. Rice's luggage. He asked meaningless and provocative questions like, "Ma'am, are you certain there's nothing prohibited by aviation security regulations in your suitcase? And do you have anything special to declare about the items you're carrying?" Meanwhile, Officer Rossi kept staring at the Coach leather handbag Ms. Rice carried, and the white gold Cartier watch sparkling on her wrist with an unmistakably covetous and calculating gaze. Mrs. Susan Rice, with the seasoned experience of a world-class diplomat who had faced countless far more tense, complex, and dangerous situations throughout her career, immediately recognized that something was very wrong, very unusual in the attitude and behavior of these two police officers. She sensed the greed, the calculation, and the underlying prejudice in their eyes. However, she strove to maintain absolute outward composure, not revealing any anxiety or fear that might embolden them. She answered their questions politely, clearly, concisely, and appropriately, without an extra word. After a few initial probing questions yielded no desired results, and perhaps feeling a bit impatient because this prey seemed tougher than they anticipated, Officer O'Malley decided it was time for the decisive blow to resort to dirtier tactics. He spoke in a gravely feigned tone, trying to appear as if he were performing an important duty. "Ma'am, we regret to inform you that the airport security's drug and explosives sniffing dog has detected unusual and highly suspicious signs from your suitcase. We have reason to suspect that your luggage may contain contraband, possibly drugs, weapons, a large undeclared sum of cash, or some other illegal item. See, this was an outright fabrication, a deliberately set trap intended to cause alarm and force the prey to submit." Ms. Susan Rice firmly denied the baseless and malicious accusation. She demanded to see concrete proof that her luggage showed unusual signs, or at least to have her entire luggage re-inspected openly, transparently, under the supervision of a manager or a higher-ranking airport security officer, not just these two officers, but O'Malley and Rossi flatly refused Mrs. Rice's legitimate request. They claimed that according to airport security regulations, in such exceptionally serious and clearly suspicious cases, they were required to take her to the airport police's private security room for closer inspection, detailed questioning, and to clarify all issues. When Susan Rice expressed her disagreement with this unreasonable and somewhat coercive demand, arguing it was blatant harassment and an unacceptable abuse of power, Officer O'Malley winked at Rossi. Without a moment's hesitation, without another warning, Rossi quickly moved in from behind. Using his superior strength as a younger man, grabbed both of Ms. Rice's arms, twisted them behind her back, and tightly cuffed her with a pair of cold, gleaming figure-8 handcuffs. The action was so swift and brutal that Ms. Rice, a woman in her 60s, slightly staggered and nearly fell forward. "You're being detained for investigation on suspicion of transporting and possessing contraband. Under the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia and federal law, you have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Rossi said, his tone now shifting to one of triumphant, smug authority, like someone holding all the cards. Ms. Susan Rice, though incredibly surprised and utterly outraged by this blatant abuse of power, inhumane treatment, and deeply discriminatory behavior, still managed to maintain the composure and demeanor of a seasoned leader, someone who had faced life-and-death situations. She did not scream, struggle, or resist, futilely knowing it would only worsen the situation. She simply looked O'Malley and Rossi straight in the eye with a chilling gaze filled with warning contempt, and something that made both officers, despite their current sense of victory, feel a vague unease, a premonition of misfortune. On the short walk leading Ms. Susan Rice from the baggage claim area to the security room, which was actually just a small, rather secluded, poorly lit, and seldom used room in a corner of the arrivals terminal, Officer O'Malley, the mastermind, may have begun his familiar and dirty extortion routine. He insinuated that if Ms. Rice played ball, Sotio cooperated a little with them, implying she had to cough up a significant lubrication fee, everything could be resolved internally, quickly, discreetly, and smoothly. She wouldn't have anything recorded in her personal record, wouldn't miss her connecting flight if she had one, and wouldn't be bothered any further by airport police. He might have named a specific price based on his experience in assessing the financial capacity of his prey, or he might have simply waited for Ms. Rice to take the hint and proactively make an attractive offer in exchange for her freedom and peace. However, Ms. Fees, Susan Rice might have flatly refused the despicable request, or perhaps she simply maintained a terrifying silence, not uttering a word, not betraying any emotion on her face. This silence and uncooperative attitude might have made O'Malley and Rossi feel somewhat uneasy and perplexed, but their insatiable greed and overconfidence in the power of the police uniforms they wore still prevented them from realizing they were playing with fire, angering a true lioness, someone who could destroy their entire careers and futures with just a few words. Upon entering the cramped and ill-equipped security room, O'Malley and Rossi continued their interrogation and pressure tactics. They deliberately feigned seriousness, demanding Ms. Rice confess honestly, immediately surrender the contraband she was deliberately concealing. They might have rummaged through her small suitcase again more brutally and disrespectfully, scattering its contents, but of course, they found nothing illegal or of significant value to confiscate. Ms. Susan Rice maintained an extraordinary calm, a composure that made even O'Malley and Rossi, who had dealt with all sorts of criminals and stubborn individuals, feel something was unusual and even a bit unsettling. After a moment of silence, carefully observing the officer's attitudes and behavior, she spoke, her voice still clear, articulate, and devoid of any fear or panic. "Officers, I request to make a phone call." Officer O'Malley initially hesitated, then flatly refused, stating that according to regulations, detainees were not allowed to use the phone without a superior's permission. But then, perhaps thinking Ms. Rice wanted to call family or friends to bring money for her bail, as they intended, or perhaps due to an overinflated confidence that he was in complete control and had nothing to fear from a lone old black woman. He winked at Rossi and agreed. However, he didn't forget to stipulate that the call had to be made right there under their close supervision on speakerphone, and Ms. Rice was not allowed to speak any foreign language other than English. Ms. Susan Rice nodded quickly in agreement. She didn't call her personal lawyer, nor did she call any family member as O'Malley and Rossi eagerly anticipated. She calmly took out her personal cell phone from her handbag, then slowly dialed a familiar number, a number perhaps millions of Americans knew from the media, but certainly not everyone had the authority and connections to call directly. The line on the other end picked up almost immediately after just one short ring. A deep, professional, and authoritative male voice came through the phone's speaker. "White House Chief of Staff's office. How may I help you, Ms.?" Susan Rice brought the phone closer to her mouth, her voice still clear, articulate, and without a trace of fear or panic, despite being handcuffed and facing two abusers of power. "Hello, this is Ambassador Susan Rice, Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council." I am currently being unlawfully detained in Security Room Number 3, Area B Terminal, Dulles International Airport, by 2 airport police officers' badge numbers. She clearly and accurately read O'Malley's badge number, and she continued distinctly reading Rossi's badge number. They have handcuffed me and accused me of transporting contraband without any concrete evidence and without following due process. I request immediate intervention from your highest leadership to resolve this situation. Officers O'Malley and Rossi, standing guard nearby, heard every word of Ms. Rice's call. Initially, upon hearing White House Chief of Staff's office, they might have smirked, thinking this old black woman was putting on a show, playing a fool, to intimidate them, or perhaps she had become delusional from fear and stress. But when they clearly and fully heard phrases like Ambassador Susan Rice, Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council, and, especially, request immediate intervention from your highest leadership, the complexions of both O'Malley and Rossi began to change rapidly and noticeably. Initial disbelief gradually gave way to unconcealable anxiety, and finally, a vague fear, a premonition of misfortune, a sense of impending disaster began to consume them both. Could it be? This woman? Was she really? Just a few short minutes after Ambassador Susan Rice's fateful phone call ended, Officer O'Malley's personal cell phone began to ring incessantly, urgently, as if something incredibly critical and serious had just occurred. On the other end of the line, one after another, were voices filled with alarm, anger, disbelief, and fear. First, it might have been the airport security shift supervisor for that night yelling into the phone, demanding O'Malley report the situation immediately. Then it could have been the voice of the chief of Dulles International Airport Police himself, roaring in fury, demanding O'Malley explain immediately why he dared to touch a high-ranking White House official, why he had unlawfully arrested someone of such special and significant status. Lori, and perhaps even a direct call from a high-ranking official at the Department of Homeland Security DHS, or from the mayor's office of Washington, D.C., or the governor of Virginia who had received urgent information from the White House. All demanded Officer O'Malley immediately account for his foolish actions. O'Malley and Rossi finally truly understood they had hit the hornet's nest, made an irretrievable mistake, an error that could destroy their entire careers and futures. Both their faces turned as white as sheets drained of all blood. Cold sweat poured down, drenching their collars and the backs of their uniform shirts. The earlier arrogance, condescension, and self-satisfaction had vanished, without a trace, replaced by extreme panic, a paralyzing fear that made their hands and legs tremble uncontrollably. They hastily, frantically tried to remove the figure-8 handcuffs, tightly cinching Ambassador Susan Rice's wrists. Their mouths stammered out jumbled apologies, clumsy explanations, trying to claim it was all just a regrettable misunderstanding, an unfortunate procedural error, that they truly had no idea who she was, that they were just doing their duty. Ambassador Susan Rice said nothing. She just looked at the trembling, terrified officers before her with a cold, sharp, judgmental gaze. In that gaze, Officer O'Malley and Officer Rossi could clearly foresee the dark and tragic future that awaited them. Within less than 30 minutes of that fateful phone call, a large delegation consisting of senior security officials from Dulles International Airport, representatives from the Federal Prosecutor's Office, and possibly a few plainclothes Secret Service agents had arrived at Security Room Number 3, where Ambassador Susan Rice was being held. Ambassador Susan Rice was now treated with the utmost respect and caution, a stark contrast to the contemptuous and brutal treatment she had endured not long before from the very people sworn to uphold the law. Officers Tom O'Malley and Mike Rossi were immediately separated from Ms. Rice. Their weapons badges, handcuffs, and all duty-related personal items were confiscated on the spot to aid the investigation. They were taken to another room under the close supervision of higher-ranking officers. An internal investigation and a criminal investigation were launched with lightning speed almost immediately under the direct orders of the highest echelons of the federal government and local authorities. All procedures were carried out urgently, seriously, and without any leniency. The detailed and clear testimony of Ambassador Susan Rice, director of the White House Domestic Policy Council, naturally became the most crucial and irrefutable evidence in this case. She recounted the entire sequence of events with meticulous detail, clearly, without adding or omitting a single detail, from being baselessly stopped by these two officers at the baggage claim, their harassing and derogatory remarks, to being brutally handcuffed and taken to the security room only to be entrapped. The security camera system in the arrivals hall and the corridor leading to the security room was also thoroughly examined, and footage extracted by airport technical experts and investigative agencies, hoping to find visual evidence of the incident. Other witnesses, possibly passengers or airport staff, who had inadvertently seen part of the incident, were also quickly summoned by investigators for statements and cross-examination. The service records of Officer O'Malley and Officer Rossi over many years were also carefully and thoroughly reviewed, and unsurprisingly, investigators would likely uncover a series of prior complaints and accusations from other passengers regarding harassment, corruption, abuse of power, and racial profiling by these two. But, perhaps for some reason, be it cover-ups by superiors, a lack of resolve from internal affairs, or simply because previous victims lacked the voice and power to pursue the matter to its conclusion, those complaints had been ignored, inadequately addressed, or even deliberately swept under the rug. Faced with overwhelming and undeniable evidence, along with immense pressure from all sides, Officer O'Malley and Officer Rossi had no way to deny or rationalize their wrongful and illegal actions. They quickly had to admit their full guilt, including deliberately setting a trap, unlawful arrest, and possibly their shadowy intentions of extortion had Ambassador Susan Rice not been a person of such special status and power. They might have tried to blame each other to mitigate their own culpability, or begged for leniency from their superiors and the victim herself, but all such efforts were too late and futile. Ambassador Susan Rice, as the direct victim of the incident, and also a high-ranking government official responsible for upholding the sanctity of the law, demanded that this incident be handled with utmost severity according to current laws. She did this not just for personal justice, not just to protect her honor, but more importantly, to set an example to deter others with intentions of abusing power or engaging in corruption, and to contribute to further cleansing the nation's law enforcement apparatus, reinforcing public trust in justice. Due to the exceptionally serious nature of the incident and the extremely sensitive position of the victim, the decision regarding Officer Tom O'Malley and Officer Mike Rossi was made quickly, decisively, and without any leniency from the authorities. Both corrupt officers were immediately and permanently fired from the airport police force, with no severance pay or benefits retained. A criminal trial was convened shortly thereafter. Officer Thomas O'Malley and Officer Michael Rossi were indicted on multiple serious charges, including abuse of official capacity, while on duty, unlawful arrest, violation of civil rights protected by the U.S. Constitution, and possibly conspiracy to commit extortion. Though this act was not fully carried out, the intent was clear. With irrefutable evidence, the court sentenced Thomas O'Malley and Michael Rossi each to 8 years in federal prison. This was considered a very strict sentence, clearly demonstrating the law's intolerance for corruption, abuse of power, and discrimination within law enforcement, especially when the victim was a high-ranking government official performing her duties and representing the nation's image. The Susan Rice incident triggered a powerful and widespread wave of reforms within the Dulles International Airport Police Force. Specifically, and possibly within other law enforcement agencies nationwide. Internal inspection, supervision, and disciplinary procedures for police misconduct were tightened more than ever. Mandatory training programs on anti-discrimination, professional ethics, respect for civil rights, and public interaction skills were also comprehensively enhanced and revamped. Ambassador Susan Rice, after this unwelcome and troublesome incident, might issue specific directives or policy proposals based on her experience and position to further improve law enforcement practices, enhance the accountability of public agencies, and better protect the freedoms and democratic rights of all citizens regardless of race, gender, or social status. The public, though perhaps not privy to all the details of the story due to its sensitive nature, would undoubtedly perceive a very clear and strong message: no one is above the law, and even those with the highest power and status in society can fall victim to wrongdoing and abuse of power. But more importantly, justice will ultimately be served swiftly and rigorously, especially when victims know how to use their voice and position correctly. The lesson learned: true power sometimes doesn't lie in the uniform you wear, the gun on your hip, or the handcuffs in your hand. True power can reside in position, intellect, integrity, and the quiet but weighty voice of an individual. A wrongful act, a foolish and short-sighted decision based on narrow prejudices and insatiable greed, can lead to an unforeseeable downfall, especially when you dare to challenge someone whose true identity and capabilities you do not know, someone who can turn an entire system on its head with a single brief phone call. What do you think of Ambassador Susan Rice's reaction when she was baselessly entrapped and arrested by the two police officers at the airport? Was her composure, decisiveness, and the decision to make that phone call an incredibly intelligent and effective move in that situation? Is an 8-year prison sentence and immediate permanent dismissal a truly appropriate punishment for the misconduct and illegal actions of Officer O'Malley and Officer Rossi? Should there be additional forms of compensation for Ambassador Susan Rice for the emotional distress and humiliation she endured, even if she might not need them? What does this story reveal to you about the dangers of abuse of power, corruption, and racial discrimination that still persist within a significant segment of those entrusted with enforcing the law and protecting justice? And do you believe that when people of status with strong voices and integrity dare to speak out and act decisively, justice will be served more quickly and effectively, contributing to a better society?